In a prehistoric tribe, the most respected person may not have been the strongest hunter, the loudest voice, or the one who could frighten others into obedience. In a small group, fear was dangerous. A person who took too much, boasted too often, or tried to stand above everyone else could become a problem the group had to quietly control. Respect may have belonged to someone different, the one people trusted near the fire, near the children, near the food, and near the memories of the dead. But in a world without crowns, written laws, or permanent titles, what made one human worth listening to? Imagine a small band of prehistoric humans settling beside a fire as darkness slowly spreads across the landscape. The group is not large, perhaps 20 people, perhaps 30. Everyone knows everyone else. They have traveled together, eaten together, worried together, and survived together. There are no walls separating private lives from public ones, no offices, ranks, uniforms, or written rules. Every action is visible, and every habit is remembered. In such a world, reputation travels faster than words. A person who regularly shares food becomes known for sharing food, while a person who avoids difficult work becomes known for avoiding difficult work. Someone who remains calm during uncertainty develops a reputation for calmness, while someone who creates trouble develops a reputation for trouble. There is very little space to hide behind appearances for long. Modern people often imagine that the strongest individual naturally became the most respected. The image is familiar. A powerful hunter returns carrying meat while others admire him, or a fierce warrior stands above everyone else and commands obedience. It is an image that appears in stories, films, and popular imagination. Yet many anthropologists studying traditional hunter-gatherer societies have observed something far more complicated. In small groups, excessive dominance can create problems. A person who constantly demands attention may disrupt cooperation. A person who takes more than their share may threaten group stability, and a person who attempts to control every decision may create resentment. Unlike large kingdoms or cities, a prehistoric band could not easily absorb these tensions because there were simply too few people. Every relationship mattered. Survival depended on cooperation in ways that are sometimes difficult for modern people to imagine. Food was unpredictable, weather was unpredictable, and injury was unpredictable. A skilled hunter could return with success one week and failure the next. A healthy adult could become injured and suddenly depend upon others. A parent caring for young children might need assistance during difficult seasons. No one remained completely independent for very long. Because of this reality, being feared was not always an advantage. Fear can force obedience for a short time, but fear also creates distance. People become cautious, they share less openly, and they trust less deeply. In a small group struggling to survive, weakened trust could be dangerous. Imagine sleeping beside someone every night for years while secretly fearing them. Imagine sharing food gathered through collective effort while believing one member consistently acts only for themselves. Such tensions do not disappear, they accumulate. The archaeological record cannot directly show us these conversations around ancient fires. We cannot excavate trust from the ground, nor can we uncover respect the way we uncover stone tools or animal bones. Yet, human beings today still carry many social instincts, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of life in small communities. One of those instincts may be a deep sensitivity to fairness. Researchers studying human cooperation often find that people react strongly when resources are distributed unfairly. They may reject unfair arrangements, even when doing so cost them something personally. While prehistoric societies varied enormously across time and place, many anthropologists believe that maintaining cooperation was a central challenge of everyday life. This brings us closer to the question at the heart of our journey. If survival depended on cooperation, then the most respected person may not always have been the person who could force others to listen. Respect may have emerged from qualities that helped a group remain stable, connected, and capable of surviving uncertainty together. As the campfire grows quieter and the evening deepens, children settle near familiar faces, food is divided, stories are exchanged, and decisions are discussed. Somewhere within these ordinary moments, long before kings, governments, or written laws existed, human beings were already deciding which people deserved their trust and which did not. And that distinction may have mattered far more than simple strength. As the fire continues to burn and the conversations drift through the evening air, it becomes easier to imagine how difficult it would have been for anyone to place themselves permanently above the rest of the group. In a prehistoric band, people did not meet occasionally. They shared nearly every part of life together. They woke beside the same faces, followed the same trails, watched the same children grow, and depended on many of the same people year after year. Success was visible, but so were weaknesses. A skilled hunter might return carrying enough meat to feed everyone, yet the same hunter could fail repeatedly during the next stretch of bad weather. Someone admired for strength in early adulthood might become injured after a fall, a hunt, or an illness. Life had a way of reminding everyone that no advantage lasted forever. This may be one reason why many small-scale societies observed by anthropologists show a remarkable caution toward excessive pride. Human beings have always noticed ability. A person who could track animals better than others, find water during dry periods, or remain calm during danger would naturally attract attention. Yet attention and respect were not necessarily the same thing. In some hunter-gatherer communities recorded in more recent centuries, successful hunters were often met not only with gratitude, but also with teasing. Friends might joke about the size of an animal. Relatives might deliberately speak as though a great achievement were ordinary. To modern ears, this can sound unfair, but the purpose was often social rather than personal. The group already knew who had succeeded. The meat lying beside the fire required no explanation. What mattered was preventing success from turning into arrogance, because arrogance could quietly damage the cooperation that everyone depended upon. Imagine a person who constantly reminded others of their achievements. At first, the behavior might seem harmless, yet over time, every boast would become another small reminder that one individual considered themselves more important than the rest. In a community where survival required sharing food, caring for children, helping the injured, and enduring difficult seasons together, such attitudes could create tension. People might begin listening less. Trust might weaken. Cooperation might become harder. The problem was not talent itself. The problem was anything that encouraged separation inside a group that needed unity. Fear created a similar challenge. A physically intimidating individual could sometimes win an argument, claim a better sleeping place, or pressure others into agreement. Yet fear has a tendency to create distance. People become cautious around those they fear. They reveal less. They share less openly. They become reluctant to depend on that person, except when absolutely necessary. In a large kingdom, a ruler might remain powerful despite such feelings because armies, laws, and institutions help maintain authority. Prehistoric bands possessed none of these things. Their survival rested largely upon voluntary cooperation. Every day required countless acts of trust that no one could force into existence. A child wandering too close to danger, an injured hunter needing assistance, a mother carrying an infant during a long journey, an elderly member struggling to keep pace with the group. These situations demanded willingness rather than obedience. People helped because relationships mattered. They helped because one day they might need help themselves. They helped because life in a small band constantly reminded them how deeply connected their futures were. Under such conditions, the individual who inspired confidence may have been far more valuable than the individual who inspired fear. The question of respect begins to look different when viewed through this lens. Perhaps the most respected person was not the one who could make others lower their eyes. Perhaps respect grew around those whose presence made cooperation easier, whose behavior strengthened trust rather than weakening it, and whose actions reminded the group that survival was something achieved together rather than alone. Long before crowns, titles, or written laws existed, people were already learning an important lesson about human communities. Strength could attract attention, but earning the confidence of others was something far more difficult, and perhaps far more valuable. Long before human beings built cities, wrote laws, or created titles that could be inherited from one generation to the next, they were already making quiet judgments about one another. Those judgments were rarely written down and almost never preserved in stone, yet they influenced countless decisions that shaped daily life. Who should be trusted to watch the children while others searched for food? Who should be listened to when a storm approached or when a familiar hunting route no longer produced results? Who could be relied upon to remain steady when fear, hunger, or uncertainty began to spread through the group? These questions mattered because the consequences were immediate. In a small prehistoric band, poor decisions could not easily be hidden by large populations or complicated institutions. People experienced the results together. If someone repeatedly acted in ways that benefited only themselves, others would notice. If someone consistently contributed to the well-being of the group, others would notice that as well. Over months and years, these observations accumulated into something more powerful than a single achievement. They became reputation. Unlike physical strength, reputation could not be displayed in a single moment. It had to be built slowly through repeated actions. A hunter might bring back a large animal one day and earn admiration for an evening, but respect often required something more enduring. It required predictability. It required the confidence that tomorrow, next month, and next year, this person would continue to behave in ways that strengthened the group rather than weakening it. This difference may seem subtle, yet it helps explain why fear and respect are not the same thing. Fear can appear quickly. A larger, stronger, or more aggressive individual may be able to intimidate others almost immediately. Respect usually develops much more slowly. It grows through observation. People watch how someone behaves when resources are scarce. They watch how that person reacts when mistakes occur. They watch whether success produces generosity or arrogance. They watch whether power is used carefully or selfishly. In a world where nearly everyone knew each other intimately, these observations carried enormous weight. The person who inspired respect may not always have been the most impressive individual in any single moment. Instead, they may have been the person whose behavior remained dependable across many moments. Anthropologists studying human cooperation often point out that trust is one of the most valuable resources any community can possess. Trust reduces uncertainty. Trust allows people to work together without constant suspicion. Trust makes sharing possible. Trust makes cooperation less costly. For prehistoric people living close to the edge of survival, these advantages were not abstract ideas. They affected whether a group could endure difficult seasons, recover from setbacks, and continue functioning when circumstances became challenging. Seen from this perspective, the most respected person in a prehistoric tribe may not have been the one who could force others to follow. A person can be obeyed without being admired. A person can be feared without being trusted. A person can win arguments without winning confidence. The qualities that encouraged others to listen voluntarily were often different from the qualities that allowed someone to dominate. As another night settles across the camp and the last light fades beyond the horizon, it becomes easier to imagine how such distinctions emerged. Around the fire sit hunters, gatherers, parents, children, elders, and companions whose lives are tightly connected. Some voices are louder than others. Some people possess greater skill in particular tasks. Yet when uncertainty appears and the group quietly considers whom to trust, the answer may depend less on strength than on something accumulated over countless ordinary days. Before respect could become influence, before influence could shape decisions, and before certain individuals became the people others naturally turned toward, It first had to be earned through the steady demonstration that life was safer, more stable, and more cooperative when that person was nearby. If respect was not simply a reward for strength, then another question begins to emerge from the darkness beyond the firelight. What caused people to listen to one person more carefully than another? In modern societies, influence is often tied to formal positions. A title can grant authority before a single word is spoken. A uniform, an office, or a written role can immediately signal who is expected to lead. Prehistoric people lived in a different world. For most of human history, there were no permanent titles recognized by everyone, no official institutions to enforce obedience, and no documents declaring who possessed authority. Yet groups still had to make decisions. They still had to choose where to travel, when to move camp, how to respond to danger, and how to manage the countless uncertainties of everyday life. Someone's voice often carried more weight than another's, but that weight had to come from somewhere. It could not simply be inherited from a system that did not yet exist. It had to be earned within the daily life of the group itself. Imagine a band facing a difficult choice during a season when food has become scarce. Familiar hunting grounds are producing less than before. The weather has become less predictable. Children need to be fed, and energy cannot be wasted on repeated mistakes. Around the fire, different opinions are offered. Some believe the group should remain where it is. Others argue for moving toward distant territory. In such a moment, people are unlikely to pay attention solely to the loudest voice. What matters more is whether previous advice has proven useful. Has this person demonstrated good judgment before? Have they shown an ability to understand situations that others overlooked? Have they repeatedly acted in ways that benefited the group rather than themselves? These questions may have mattered far more than confidence alone. Human beings naturally observe patterns. We notice who tends to be correct, who remains calm under pressure, and who consistently behaves in reliable ways. Over time, these observations create a form of influence that does not depend on force. A person may never demand attention, yet others begin turning toward them when uncertainty appears. Their opinions are sought out. Their warnings are taken seriously. Their suggestions receive careful consideration. This process is familiar even today. In many families, workplaces, and communities, there are individuals whose influence exceeds any official role they possess. People listen because experience has taught them that listening is often worthwhile. Something similar may have existed in prehistoric societies, perhaps even more strongly because survival depended so heavily upon practical judgment. The difference between a wise decision and a poor one could sometimes affect the well-being of everyone in the group. Anthropologists often distinguish between power and prestige. Power allows a person to influence others through control, pressure, or coercion. Prestige emerges when others voluntarily grant attention and respect because they perceive value in what that individual knows or does. While prehistoric societies varied enormously across regions and periods, many researchers believe prestige may have played an important role in hunter-gatherer life. People often benefited from learning from skilled, knowledgeable, or dependable individuals. Listening was not necessarily an act of submission. It could be a practical response to demonstrated competence. This possibility changes how we think about respect in a prehistoric tribe. Rather than imagining a leader standing above everyone else, it may be more accurate to imagine a person whose influence flowed outward from trust. Others listened not because they were required to, but because experience suggested that doing so improved their chances of success. The voice that carried the greatest weight may not have been the loudest voice in the camp. It may have been the voice that had quietly earned confidence over many seasons, through many hardships, and across countless ordinary moments when good judgment proved its value once again. The confidence that people place in another human being is rarely created in a single day. It forms gradually, often so gradually that no one notices it happening. In a prehistoric tribe, There may never have been a moment when the group gathered together and formally decided that one person deserved greater respect than everyone else. More often, respect likely emerged through accumulation. One useful observation was followed by another. One dependable action was followed by another. One difficult situation was handled well, then another, then another. Over the years, these moments began to connect like threads woven into a larger pattern. A young member of the group might first notice that certain people remained unusually calm when others became anxious. Later, they might observe that the same individuals were often correct when judging the weather, selecting travel routes, locating water, or anticipating animal movements. Still later, they might see those individuals share knowledge freely rather than guarding it for personal advantage. None of these actions alone would necessarily create deep respect. Together, however, they could create something far more powerful than a single display of skill. They could create confidence. This confidence was valuable because prehistoric life contained endless uncertainty. Every journey involved unknowns. Every hunting expedition carried risk. Every season brought changes that had to be interpreted correctly. Human beings are naturally drawn towards sources of reliable information when facing uncertainty, and this tendency may have been especially important during the hundreds of thousands of years when survival depended heavily upon practical knowledge of the surrounding world. A person who repeatedly helped others avoid mistakes provided a benefit that extended far beyond any one event. Their value was felt again and again. Imagine a child growing into adulthood within the same band. Over many years, they observe the people around them. They see who panics during setbacks and who remains composed. They see who shares credit and who seeks attention. They see who contributes consistently and who contributes only when recognition is likely. Because life unfolds in close proximity, such observations become difficult to ignore. Reputation grows from memory, and memory in a small community can be remarkably long. An act of generosity may be remembered for years. A pattern of selfishness may also be remembered for years. In this way, respect became connected not only to what a person could do, but also to how they chose to do it. The most skilled individual was not automatically the most admired. Skill that benefited only the individual was less valuable than skill that strengthened the group. This distinction appears repeatedly in anthropological research on cooperation. Human communities often reward behaviors that contribute to collective well-being because such behaviors improve the chances of survival for everyone involved. Long before written moral codes existed, people were already responding to these incentives through everyday social relationships. As trust accumulated, influence often followed naturally. Others became more willing to listen. Suggestions received more attention. Warnings were taken more seriously. Advice carried greater weight, yet this influence remained fundamentally different from command. It depended on continued confidence. A respected person could not simply rely on past achievements forever. They had to maintain the trust they had earned. If their judgment deteriorated, if they became selfish, or if they repeatedly acted against the interests of the group, respect could weaken over time. In that sense, prestige was both valuable and fragile. It existed only as long as other people believed it remained deserved. This may be one of the most important clues to understanding what made someone respected in a prehistoric tribe. Respect was not merely a reflection of what a person possessed. It was a reflection of what other people experienced when interacting with them. When individuals consistently made life safer, wiser, more predictable, and more cooperative, others naturally became more willing to listen. The path toward influence did not necessarily begin with authority. It often began with something much quieter, the repeated demonstration that paying attention to this person was usually a good idea. By the time a person had earned the confidence of those around them, their influence may have become so familiar that few people stopped to think about where it came from. It simply existed in the background of daily life, woven into hundreds of small decisions that shaped the survival of the group. When uncertainty appeared, certain faces were watched more carefully. When opinions differed, certain voices received a little more attention. This did not necessarily mean everyone agreed with them. Prehistoric communities were made up of human beings, and human beings have always disagreed. Different personalities, different experiences, and different interests would have existed then just as they do now. Yet, even in disagreement, some individuals appear to have developed a reputation for judgment that others found difficult to ignore. The process was subtle, no ceremony was required, no title had to be announced. Influence emerged because experience repeatedly reinforced the same lesson. Listening to this person often proved useful. Ignoring them often proved costly. Over many seasons, these patterns became part of the social memory of the group. A young person growing up beside the fire might hear stories not only about successful hunts, but also about wise decisions made during difficult times. They might learn how a certain individual recognized signs of changing weather before anyone else noticed them, or how another remembered a reliable water source during a period of drought, or how someone helped prevent conflict when tensions threatened to divide the group. These stories did more than preserve information. They preserved reputation. Long before writing existed, memory served as one of the most important ways human communities recorded value. People remembered who could be trusted. They remembered who contributed during hardship. They remembered who acted fairly when circumstances became difficult. Through memory, respect could survive long after a single event had passed. This helps explain why influence in prehistoric societies may have depended heavily upon consistency. One impressive success could attract admiration, but repeated success combined with dependable behavior created something deeper. Human beings are naturally cautious about whom they trust. Trust involves risk. When we listen to someone's advice, follow their guidance, or rely on their judgment, we expose ourselves to the possibility that they may be wrong. For that reason, confidence is rarely given freely. It must usually be earned through evidence gathered over time. In a prehistoric environment filled with uncertainty, this process may have been especially important. People could not afford to ignore patterns. They paid attention to who repeatedly demonstrated useful knowledge, practical wisdom, and concern for the well-being of the group. As a result, the most respected person may not always have been the most visible person. Visibility and respect are not identical. Someone can attract attention through strength, charisma, or bold behavior, yet still fail to earn deep trust. Another individual may appear quieter and less dramatic, while steadily building a reputation that causes others to listen whenever important decisions arise. The difference lies not in how loudly a person speaks, but in how often their actions prove worthy of confidence. Seen through this lens, respect begins to look less like status and more like a form of social investment. People gradually invest their confidence in individuals who have demonstrated value over long periods of time. Every useful observation, every fair decision, every act of reliability adds another layer to that investment. Eventually, the group begins to turn towards certain individuals almost automatically when uncertainty appears. Yet another question now begins to emerge. If trust and good judgment helped create respect, what role did skill play? Surely a person who could hunt exceptionally well, track animals across difficult terrain, find hidden water, or master other demanding tasks would attract attention. Skill clearly mattered in prehistoric life. The challenge is understanding whether skill alone was enough to create lasting respect, or whether something more was required. That question will lead us into another layer of the story, because the people who impressed others were not always the same people who earned their deepest admiration. In a world where survival depended upon knowledge, endurance, and practical ability, skill naturally attracted attention. A person who could find animals when others returned empty-handed, who could recognize useful plants hidden among countless similar ones, or who could navigate unfamiliar terrain without becoming lost, possessed something valuable. Every prehistoric community depended upon such abilities. Food did not appear automatically. Water could not always be taken for granted. Shelter required effort. Mistakes could carry consequences measured not in inconvenience, but in hunger, injury, or lost opportunities. Under these conditions, competence was impossible to ignore. Imagine a hunting party moving across a landscape that offers few obvious clues. To an inexperienced observer, the ground may appear almost empty, yet one individual notices a broken branch, a faint impression in the soil, a pattern of disturbed vegetation, or signs left by animals hours earlier. What seems invisible to most people becomes meaningful to them. Others begin paying attention because the results are visible. The group finds food more often, time and energy are used more effectively, survival becomes slightly easier. Similar patterns may have existed in many other parts of prehistoric life. Someone might possess unusual knowledge of seasonal plants. Another might excel at making tools that last longer and function more reliably. Someone else might have an exceptional memory for routes, landmarks, and water sources spread across large territories. These abilities mattered because they produced real benefits. Human beings naturally notice individuals whose actions consistently improve outcomes. Long before schools, certifications, or formal training programs existed, people were already identifying expertise through observation. They watched results. They learned whom to seek out when particular problems appeared. In this way, skill often became one of the first foundations of reputation. A person who repeatedly demonstrated competence could quickly become known throughout a small community. Stories about their abilities might circulate around campfires. Younger members of the group might observe them closely. Others might seek opportunities to learn from them. Skill generated attention because it offered practical value. Yet attention and respect were not always identical. A highly skilled person could impress others without necessarily earning deep trust. Consider two individuals who possess similar abilities. Both are excellent hunters. Both understand the landscape. Both regularly contribute useful knowledge. If one shares that knowledge freely, while the other guards it jealously, people may view them differently. If one uses success to help the group, while the other uses success primarily to elevate themselves, their reputations may develop in different directions. The distinction is subtle, but important. Human communities often evaluate not only what a person can do, but also how they choose to use what they can do. This tendency may have deep roots in prehistoric life, because cooperation amplified the value of individual skill. An exceptional hunter could provide food, but food became most valuable when shared. An expert tracker could locate animals, but that knowledge benefited more people when passed to others. A talented toolmaker could improve daily life, but their contribution extended further when their skills strengthened the capabilities of the group as a whole. For this reason, skill may have functioned as an invitation rather than a guarantee. It invited attention. It created opportunities for influence. It encouraged others to observe more closely. Yet lasting respect often depended upon what followed. Once people recognized someone's abilities, they also began paying attention to character, reliability, generosity, and judgment. The same competence that earned admiration also placed that person under closer observation. Every success created expectations. Every achievement revealed more about how that individual chose to interact with others. As the years passed, some skilled individuals likely transformed ability into deep respect, while others may have remained admired for what they could do without ever becoming the people whom others trusted most. This distinction matters because it brings us closer to understanding a recurring pattern in human societies. Skill often opened the door, but something beyond skill determined whether people would continue listening once that door had been opened. A person could be admired for what they were capable of doing and still fail to become the individual others trusted most. This distinction may seem surprising at first, because skill is so visible. When a hunter returns successfully, everyone can see the result. When a toolmaker produces an exceptionally useful spear point or knife, the evidence can be held in the hand. When someone consistently finds water during difficult journeys, the benefits are immediate and unmistakable. Competence announces itself through outcomes. Trust, however, develops through something less dramatic. It develops through patterns of behavior observed over long periods of time. This difference may explain why the most skilled individual in a prehistoric tribe was not automatically the most respected. Imagine a hunter whose abilities far exceed those of almost everyone around him. He notices signs others miss, moves efficiently across the landscape, and regularly returns with food when conditions are difficult. People naturally pay attention to such a person because his skills improve the chances of survival for the entire group. Yet imagine that the same individual constantly reminds others of his accomplishments, becomes irritated when he is questioned, and treats less capable members of the community with impatience. His hunting skill remains valuable. No one denies that. The food still arrives. The results are still visible. Yet over time, another impression begins to form alongside admiration. People may appreciate what he provides while becoming less enthusiastic about the person himself. They may acknowledge his competence while feeling reluctant to depend on him in other areas of life. They may listen when the conversation concerns hunting, yet turn elsewhere when seeking advice about conflict, cooperation, or matters affecting the group as a whole. Human beings often separate these judgments more than we realize. We can admire an ability without fully trusting the individual who possesses it. The opposite situation can also occur. A person may never become the greatest hunter, the fastest runner, or the most talented toolmaker, yet still earn remarkable respect because of how they use the abilities they do possess. They may share knowledge patiently with younger members of the group. They may remain generous during periods of scarcity. They may help resolve disagreements before they become serious conflicts. They may contribute in dozens of small ways that rarely attract immediate attention, but steadily strengthen the community around them. Such contributions are less dramatic than a successful hunt, yet they are often remembered for much longer. Anthropologists have frequently noted that many hunter-gatherer societies place great importance on maintaining cooperation. This should not be surprising. A small group survives not because one individual excels, but because many individuals continue working together despite differences in age, strength, experience, and personality. Under these conditions, skill becomes most valuable when it supports cooperation rather than undermining it. A talented hunter who shares food may strengthen social bonds. A knowledgeable elder who teaches others may spread useful information throughout the group. A skilled tracker who helps younger people learn may increase the long-term resilience of the entire community. In each case, ability becomes something larger than personal success. It becomes a resource that benefits everyone. This may be why respect often appears to follow not only competence, but also contribution. People notice who creates value for the group and who merely creates value for themselves. The distinction is not always obvious in the moment, but over many seasons it becomes increasingly clear. Memories accumulate, reputations grow, children observe adults. Adults remember past actions. Stories are told and retold around fires. Gradually, a community develops a shared understanding of which individuals make life better for those around them. Seen from this perspective, skill alone may have been only the beginning of the journey toward respect. It captured attention and created opportunities, but attention is temporary. Lasting respect required something more enduring. It required that ability be connected to behaviors that others considered valuable, trustworthy, and beneficial beyond the interests of a single person. The people who earned the deepest admiration were often not simply those who could do extraordinary things. They were the people whose abilities consistently made the lives of others a little safer, a little easier, and a little more secure. As people observed one another across years rather than days, the difference between talent and respect may have become increasingly clear. Talent could appear suddenly. A young hunter might reveal remarkable tracking ability long before reaching full adulthood. A toolmaker might discover techniques that produced stronger or more reliable implements than those made by others. Someone might possess an unusually sharp memory for landmarks, animal behavior, or seasonal changes. These abilities could attract attention quickly because their results were visible. Respect, however, often moved at a slower pace. It developed through repeated encounters with the same individual under different circumstances, through seasons of abundance and seasons of scarcity, through success and disappointment, and through moments when personal interests conflicted with the needs of the group. It was during these ordinary tests of character that people learned something skill alone could never reveal. Imagine two hunters who are equally successful. Both return with food more often than most members of the band. Both understand animal movements and contribute valuable knowledge. Yet over time, differences begin to emerge. One becomes protective of his expertise, treating knowledge as a possession that increases his personal importance. The other shares observations freely, helping younger hunters learn the same skills. One enjoys admiration but quietly competes with those around him, while the other seems genuinely pleased when others improve. Both may remain respected to some degree for their abilities, but the second individual is likely building something deeper. He is creating value that extends beyond his own lifetime. Every lesson shared increases the strength of the group, and every piece of knowledge passed forward becomes part of the community rather than remaining the property of a single person. This pattern appears throughout human history. Knowledge often becomes more powerful when shared, and skills often become more valuable when they strengthen relationships rather than elevating one person above everyone else. In small prehistoric communities, where survival depended heavily upon cooperation, this principle may have been especially important. A skilled individual could improve life through personal achievement, but a skilled individual who helped others become more capable could improve life for many years to come. The benefits multiplied. A young hunter who learned from an experienced tracker might later teach another generation. Useful knowledge could spread through the group like a slowly expanding circle, touching people who had never even met the original source. Such behavior may have shaped the way respect was distributed within prehistoric societies. People were not simply evaluating outcomes, they were also observing intentions. They noticed who contributed when recognition was unlikely. They noticed who remained generous when resources were limited. They noticed who continued helping others, even when there was little personal advantage in doing so. These observations accumulated quietly, forming reputations that became part of the social memory of the group. Long before formal education, written records, or official leadership positions existed, communities were already deciding whose example deserved to be followed. This brings us to an important realization. The most respected person in a prehistoric tribe may not have been the individual who possessed the greatest amount of skill. Instead, respect often seems to have emerged when skill was combined with qualities that benefited others. Ability attracted attention. Reliability created trust. Generosity strengthened relationships. Together, these qualities transformed competence into something far more influential. People did not simply admire such individuals. They listened to them. They sought their advice. They remembered their actions. Their value extended beyond any single task because their presence improved the functioning of the group itself. The story of respect is therefore becoming more complex than a simple competition of strength or talent. A person could earn admiration through exceptional ability, yet the deepest forms of respect often grew from what they chose to do with that ability. This distinction becomes even more important as we move forward, because once food was obtained, another question immediately followed. In a world where no one could guarantee tomorrow's success, what happened to that food mattered almost as much as finding it in the first place. The answer leads us toward one of the most powerful sources of respect in prehistoric life, the willingness to share. The food lying beside a prehistoric fire may have carried a meaning far greater than simple nutrition. To modernize, it is easy to imagine that the person who obtained that food automatically gained status by possessing it. Yet, for much of human history, possession itself may have been far less important than what happened next. A successful hunt could bring relief to an entire group, but hunting success was rarely predictable. One day, a hunter might return with more meat than the community could consume immediately, while the following week the same hunter might return empty-handed several times in a row. Weather changed, animal movements changed, injuries happened, and luck played a role that no amount of skill could completely eliminate. Life in a hunter-gatherer society was filled with uncertainty, and uncertainty has a way of teaching people lessons about dependence. Even the most capable individual eventually discovers that there are days when they need others. A hunter may need someone to care for an injury. A mother caring for a young child may need food gathered by someone else. An older member of the group may depend on younger adults during a difficult journey. Over time, these realities create a simple understanding. Survival is rarely an individual achievement. It is something woven together from the efforts of many people whose fortunes rise and fall at different moments. This may help explain why sharing appears so frequently in anthropological studies of hunter-gatherer societies. Across different environments and cultures, researchers have often observed systems in which food moves beyond the person who acquired it. A successful hunter does not necessarily keep everything. Gathered foods may circulate among relatives and companions. Resources flow through social relationships in ways that strengthen connections throughout the group. The exact customs vary enormously from one society to another, but the broader pattern appears again and again. Food becomes more than food. It becomes a way of maintaining trust. Imagine returning to camp after a successful hunt. Children notice the arrival long before they understand the details. Conversations shift. People gather closer to the fire. The animal represents nourishment, but it also represents an opportunity to demonstrate something about character. A person can use success to elevate themselves above others, or they can use success to reinforce the bonds that keep the group together. Everyone watching learns something from that choice. They learn whether this individual sees prosperity as a private reward or as a shared resource. They learn whether good fortune makes the person more generous or more possessive. They learn whether success strengthens relationships or weakens them. These lessons may remain in memory long after the meal itself has been forgotten. A piece of meat lasts only a short time. A reputation can last for years. This is where the story of respect begins to move beyond skill alone. Finding food required ability, knowledge, patience, and experience, but sharing food revealed something different. It revealed how a person understood their place within the community. In a world where no one could guarantee tomorrow's success, generosity was not merely kindness. It was part of a larger system that helped reduce risk for everyone. Those who shared today might receive help tomorrow. Those who contributed during times of abundance could depend upon others during times of hardship. Gradually, people learned who could be counted upon when circumstances changed. They learned whose success benefited more than themselves. They learned whose presence made the group feel more secure. Under such conditions, respect may have grown not only around those who could provide, but around those who understood that provision carried responsibility. The ability to acquire resources attracted attention, yet the willingness to distribute those resources may have revealed something even more important about a person's value to the community. The value of generosity becomes easier to understand when we remember how uncertain prehistoric life could be. A modern person can often store food, purchase supplies, or rely upon systems that continue functioning even when an individual experiences temporary difficulties. For most prehistoric people, security was far less predictable. A hunting expedition that succeeded brilliantly one week could fail the next. A familiar source of food could suddenly become less reliable. An injury that seems minor today could make travel or hunting difficult tomorrow. No matter how talented a person happened to be, there were limits to what they could control. The landscape itself constantly reminded people of this reality. Seasons changed, animal herds shifted their movements, storms arrived without warning, illness appeared unexpectedly. In such a world, the question was not whether someone would eventually need help, but when. Because everyone faced uncertainty, sharing may have functioned as something more practical than simple kindness. It helped create a network of mutual support that spread risk across the entire group. When food moved from one household to another, or from one successful hunter to many different individuals, the benefits extended beyond the immediate meal. Every act of sharing strengthened relationships that might later become important during difficult times. People learned whom they could depend upon. They learned who remained generous even when resources were valuable. They learned who understood that survival was a collective effort rather than a personal competition. These observations accumulated quietly in memory, shaping reputations in ways that could last for many years. Imagine two equally successful hunters returning from repeated hunts over the course of several seasons. Both possess remarkable skill, both contribute valuable resources, yet one consistently shares without hesitation, while the other becomes known for protecting every advantage for himself and his closest relatives. The difference between them may not seem dramatic at first. Both continue providing food. Both remain useful members of the community. Yet over time, people begin drawing different conclusions about what each individual represents. One becomes associated with security, reliability, and cooperation. The other becomes associated primarily with personal success. The distinction grows larger with every season because human beings rarely remember only what people achieve. They also remember how those achievements affected everyone around them. A generous person leaves traces in many lives. Children remember meals shared during difficult periods. Families remember assistance received when circumstances became challenging. Older members remember who continued contributing when recognition was unlikely. Long after the details of individual hunts have faded, these experiences remain part of the social memory of the group. This may be one reason why generosity appears so frequently in discussions of prestige and respect. Sharing transformed personal success into collective benefit. It converted individual skill into something larger than the individual. A hunter could feed people for a day, but generosity could strengthen relationships for years. The same principle may have applied beyond food. Knowledge could be shared, time could be shared, effort could be shared, protection could be shared. In each case, people were observing not only what someone possessed, but also what they were willing to contribute. Respect often followed those contributions because they made life more stable for everyone involved. A person who repeatedly strengthened the community became increasingly valuable to the community. This does not mean prehistoric people were perfectly selfless. Human beings have always experienced competition, disagreement, and personal ambition. Yet, alongside those tendencies, existed another reality. Groups survived more effectively when cooperation remained strong. Individuals who reinforced that cooperation through generosity were helping maintain something essential. They were helping preserve the network of relationships that allowed people to endure uncertainty together. As these patterns repeated across years and generations, the connection between sharing and respect may have become deeply embedded within social life. The people who gained the greatest admiration were not always those who accumulated the most resources. They were often those whose actions ensured that resources benefited more than themselves, and in doing so, they demonstrated a quality that others rarely forgot. They demonstrated that success carried obligations as well as rewards, and that understanding may have made them worth listening to long after a single moment of achievement had passed. As the years passed and countless meals were shared around countless fires, people were learning lessons about one another that reached far beyond the food itself. A successful hunt could satisfy hunger for a short time, but the memory of how that success was handled could remain for much longer. Children watched, younger adults watched, elders watched. Everyone observed not only who returned with resources, but also what happened afterward. Did that person become more generous when fortune favored them, or more possessive? Did success strengthen their connection to the group, or did it encourage them to separate themselves from others? These questions may rarely have been spoken aloud, yet they were constantly being answered through behavior. Human communities often develop expectations about what admirable people should do, and prehistoric societies were likely no different. When someone repeatedly shared food, knowledge, effort, or support, they were communicating something important about themselves. They were demonstrating that the well-being of the group mattered to them. Such demonstrations carried weight because everyone understood how easily circumstances could change. The individual sharing resources today might become the person needing assistance tomorrow. A skilled hunter could suffer an injury. A knowledgeable elder could become physically weaker with age. A parent caring for young children could experience periods when gathering food became more difficult. Life provided endless reminders that independence was never absolute. Because everyone lived with this reality, generosity may have been interpreted not as a sign of weakness, but as evidence of wisdom. It reflected an understanding of how survival actually worked. No one succeeded entirely alone. Every person depended upon relationships built over years of cooperation. The strongest networks were often created by people who contributed consistently to others rather than focusing only on themselves. In this way, generosity helped create something larger than gratitude. It helped create trust. When people repeatedly experienced fairness and support from the same individual, they became more confident in that person's intentions. Confidence gradually became respect. Respect gradually became influence. The process was rarely dramatic. There was no need for ceremonies or declarations. Influence emerged naturally because people preferred listening to individuals whose actions had repeatedly benefited the community. This helps explain why the most respected person in a prehistoric tribe may not always have been the one who possessed the most impressive abilities. Skill mattered, knowledge mattered, experience mattered. Yet all of these qualities gained additional value when they were used in ways that strengthened relationships rather than weakening them. A hunter who shared food could become more respected than a hunter who guarded every advantage. A knowledgeable individual who taught others could become more respected than one who kept information to themselves. Again and again, the pattern points toward the same conclusion. Communities paid attention not only to what people could do, but to what people contributed. Over many generations, such observations likely shaped ideas about character, reputation, and worth. The individuals remembered most fondly were often those whose presence made life more secure for others. They reduced uncertainty. They strengthened cooperation. They helped transform individual successes into collective benefits. When people looked across the camp and considered whom they trusted, whom they valued, and whom they listened to most carefully, the answer may often have included those who consistently gave more to the group than circumstances required. Their generosity created a sense of stability that could not easily be measured but could certainly be felt. In a world where tomorrow was never guaranteed, that feeling of security carried enormous importance. A person who made others feel safer, more supported, and more connected was offering something as valuable as food itself. This realization brings us toward another source of respect that may have been just as important as generosity. Food could sustain a community for a day, but knowledge could guide a community for years. Long before writing existed, some individuals carried an extraordinary responsibility within human groups. They remembered what others might forget, and that memory could become one of the most valuable resources a tribe possessed. Long before human beings could write instructions on clay tablets, carve records into stone, or preserve information inside books, nearly everything that mattered had to live inside human memory. The location of a reliable water source during a dry season, the safest route through unfamiliar territory, the time of year when certain plants became available, the behavior of animals during migration, the signs that a storm might be approaching, the stories explaining where the group had traveled in the past, and why certain places were remembered with caution or respect. All of this knowledge existed because someone remembered it. To modern people surrounded by written information, it can be difficult to appreciate how valuable memory once was. Today, knowledge can be stored outside the mind. For most of prehistoric history, that option did not exist. If important information disappeared from memory, it could disappear entirely. Because of this, some individuals may have become valuable, not because they were the strongest or fastest members of the community, but because they carried knowledge that helped everyone else navigate an uncertain world. Imagine a group moving across a landscape they have known for generations. To a child, the route may seem simple. Adults walk in a particular direction and eventually arrive where they intend to go. Yet hidden beneath that apparent simplicity are hundreds of decisions shaped by accumulated experience. Someone remembers which valleys flood after heavy rain. Someone remembers which water sources remain dependable during dry periods. Someone remembers where dangerous encounters occurred years earlier. Someone remembers which areas tend to attract animals at particular times of year. These memories are rarely dramatic. They do not announce themselves the way a successful hunt does. Yet they quietly influence survival again and again. A mistake in memory could lead a group toward unnecessary danger. Accurate memory could help avoid it. Over many years, people would naturally begin noticing who possessed this kind of knowledge. Certain individuals seem to carry maps inside their minds long before maps existed. Others remembered stories connected to specific places, stories that preserved practical information beneath the surface of narrative. A tale about a difficult journey might also contain lessons about weather patterns. A story about ancestors might preserve knowledge of migration routes. Memory and survival often became intertwined. Anthropologists studying oral societies have repeatedly observed that information can be transmitted across generations with remarkable care when communities depend upon it. Before writing, memory was not merely a personal ability. It was part of the infrastructure of human life. Knowledge moved from one mind to another through conversation, observation, storytelling, and teaching. The people who became especially skilled at preserving and transmitting that knowledge may have occupied an important place within their communities. Their value did not depend on physical strength. A person could become older and less capable of demanding physical tasks, while still remaining deeply important because of what they remembered. In fact, some forms of knowledge become more valuable with time. A hunter may possess experience from dozens of seasons. An elder may remember environmental changes that younger people have never witnessed. A traveler may carry knowledge gathered across years of movement through different landscapes. Each additional year potentially adds another layer of information that can help others make better decisions. This creates an interesting possibility when thinking about respect in prehistoric tribes. If people listen to those who repeatedly help them navigate uncertainty, then knowledge itself may have become a source of influence. Not influence gained through fear, wealth, or authority, but influence earned because useful information improved the chances of survival. A person who remembered what others forgot could provide something difficult to replace. Food could satisfy hunger for a short while, but knowledge could shape decisions for years. Around fires, during journeys, and across generations, some individuals may have become respected because they carried pieces of the community's memory within them. Their contribution was often invisible until the moment it became necessary, and when that moment arrived, everyone suddenly understood how valuable such knowledge truly was. The importance of memory becomes even clearer when we imagine what happened to knowledge before there were libraries, notebooks, maps, or written instructions of any kind. Every lesson learned by one generation faced a simple challenge. It had to survive long enough to reach the next. A successful hunting technique, an understanding of seasonal changes, a warning about dangerous terrain, or the location of a reliable source of water could not be stored on a shelf for future use. It had to be carried by people. Knowledge traveled inside conversations, stories, demonstrations, and repeated experiences shared around fires and along familiar paths. In this sense, memory was not merely an individual ability. It was one of the most important ways a community protected itself against forgetting. A group that remembered useful information possessed an advantage over a group that lost it. This reality may help explain why knowledge often became associated with respect. The person who remembered details that others overlooked could contribute value again and again without ever lifting a spear. During a journey, they might recall a safer route taken years earlier. During a difficult season, they might remember where food had been found when conditions were similar in the past. During a discussion about whether to move camp, they might draw upon experiences gathered across decades rather than months. These contributions were rarely dramatic, yet their effects could be significant. Human beings often pay attention to individuals whose knowledge repeatedly proves useful, and prehistoric communities were likely no exception. The longer a person lived, the more opportunities they had to accumulate experiences that younger members had never encountered. A severe drought that occurred 20 years earlier might still exist in the memory of an older adult while remaining completely unknown to younger people. Changes in animal behavior, unusual weather patterns, difficult migrations, and past mistakes all became part of a growing reservoir of experience. Not every older individual automatically possessed wisdom, of course. Age and wisdom are not identical. Yet age provided opportunities to witness events that others had not seen, and those experiences could become valuable when similar situations appeared again. This may be one reason why elders often occupied important positions in many traditional societies. Their value did not necessarily depend upon physical strength. It depended upon accumulated knowledge. A younger hunter might outrun them, a younger adult might carry heavier loads. Yet neither could instantly acquire decades of lived experience. Memory allowed older individuals to continue contributing long after their physical abilities began to change. In many ways, they remained useful because they helped transform past events into present guidance. Stories played an important role in this process. To modern ears, stories sometimes sound like entertainment, but in oral societies they often carried information that was practical as well as meaningful. A story about a difficult journey could preserve knowledge about geography. A story about ancestors might contain lessons about cooperation, caution, or survival. A story repeated across generations could function as a container for information that people considered worth remembering. The individuals who preserved and shared such stories were helping maintain the continuity of the community itself. Every time knowledge passed successfully from one generation to the next, the group retained something valuable that might otherwise have disappeared. Seen from this perspective, respect may have grown naturally around those who served as reliable keepers of experience. They reduced uncertainty. They connected the present to the past. They helped younger members avoid mistakes that had already been made before. Most importantly, they provided guidance that no one could easily replace. A successful hunt might feed the group for a short period, but a remembered lesson could influence decisions for years. This gave knowledge a unique form of value within prehistoric life. Unlike food, it could be shared without being divided. Unlike physical strength, it did not necessarily diminish when given to others. In fact, knowledge often became more powerful the more widely it spread, and the people who helped preserve and distribute it may have earned a level of respect that extended far beyond their individual abilities. As knowledge accumulated across generations, Its value often became visible in moments when uncertainty returned. A successful hunt could solve the problem of today. A remembered lesson could help solve the problems of many tomorrows. This difference may explain why memory occupied such an important place in human communities long before the first written words appeared. Every group faced situations that no individual could fully predict. Weather patterns shifted. Animal populations changed. Familiar routes became dangerous. New opportunities appeared in unexpected places. When these moments arrived, people naturally searched for guidance, and guidance often came from those who carried the largest store of experience within their minds. What made this especially important was that experience allowed people to see beyond the present moment. A younger person encountering a difficult situation for the first time could only judge it through immediate observation. Someone who had lived through similar circumstances years earlier possessed an additional advantage. They could compare the present with the past. They could recognize patterns that others had not yet learned to see. In many ways, memory expanded the horizon of decision-making. It transformed isolated events into part of a larger story. A dry season was no longer simply a dry season if someone remembered another drought decades earlier and the choices that helped the group survive it. A change in animal behavior was no longer merely a mystery if someone recalled similar changes from the past. Every remembered experience became another tool that could be used when uncertainty appeared. This ability may have generated a form of respect, very different from the respect earned through physical skill. A talented hunter demonstrated value through action. A knowledgeable elder often demonstrated value through understanding. Both forms of contribution mattered, but they served different purposes. One helped solve immediate challenges. The other helped interpret those challenges within a broader context. Human communities benefit from both. Survival requires action, yet effective action often depends upon good judgment. Knowledge and memory helped provide that judgment. They allowed people to make decisions informed not only by what they could see today, but also by what had happened before. Around prehistoric fires, stories may have functioned as bridges between these two worlds. They connected past experiences to present needs. They preserved information in forms that could be remembered and repeated. A story about a journey, a difficult season, or a remarkable individual was rarely only about the past. It carried lessons forward into the future. Every retelling strengthened the community's ability to remember. Every listener became a potential guardian of knowledge. In this way, memory itself became a collective resource shared among many individuals, yet some people inevitably played a larger role in preserving it than others. Those individuals helped ensure that useful experiences did not disappear when a single life ended. They transformed personal knowledge into communal knowledge. Their contribution extended beyond their own survival because it increased the survival prospects of future generations as well. This may be one of the deepest reasons why knowledge often attracts respect. Useful knowledge creates benefits that continue long after the original experience has passed. It helps people avoid repeating costly mistakes. It reveals opportunities that others might overlook. It allows communities to build upon what they have already learned, instead of beginning again from nothing. The individuals who preserved and transmitted such knowledge were providing something that could not easily be measured yet remained enormously valuable. They were helping their communities remember. As we continue exploring what made someone respected in a prehistoric tribe, another pattern begins to emerge from these observations. The people who earned lasting admiration often made life safer, not only through what they did, but through whom they protected. A community could survive without many comforts, but it could not survive without its children. This reality created another source of respect, one rooted not in hunting, skill, or memory, but in trustworthiness, care, and responsibility toward those who were most vulnerable. A community could survive a failed hunt. It could recover from a poor season. It could even adapt to changes in the landscape if given enough time. What it could not survive was the loss of too many children over too many generations. Every prehistoric group depended upon its youngest members in a very direct way. They represented the future of the community, the continuation of knowledge, relationships, and shared experience. Yet human children are unusual when compared with the young of many other animals. They require years of care before they can fully provide for themselves. They need protection long after birth. They need food, attention, teaching, and constant supervision during stages of life when they are curious enough to explore danger without fully understanding it. This reality shaped human societies in profound ways. Raising children was never the responsibility of a single person alone. Anthropologists often describe human beings as a species that relies heavily upon cooperative care. Parents were essential, of course, but parents were rarely the only people involved. Grandparents, relatives, older siblings, and other trusted members of the community often played important roles as well. In small prehistoric groups, this network of care may have been one of the foundations upon which survival rested. A child who received support from many people possessed a greater chance of reaching adulthood. A community that successfully protected its young possessed a greater chance of continuing into the future. Because children were so important, trust became equally important. Not everyone inspired the same degree of confidence. People naturally observed how others behaved around vulnerable members of the group. They noticed who was patient and who was careless. They noticed who could be relied upon and who created unnecessary risk. These observations mattered because vulnerability reveals character in ways that ordinary situations often do not. It is easy to behave generously when circumstances are comfortable. It is more revealing to observe how someone behaves when responsibility brings inconvenience, effort, or sacrifice. Over time, patterns became visible. Some individuals consistently demonstrated concern for the well-being of others. They watched carefully. They helped willingly. They responded when assistance was needed. Their value extended beyond their personal abilities because they contributed to the security of people who could not always protect themselves. This contribution may have generated a particularly deep form of respect. A skilled hunter could provide food. A knowledgeable elder could provide guidance. A trustworthy caregiver helped ensure that the next generation survived long enough to benefit from both. The importance of such individuals becomes easier to appreciate when we remember how much information young people needed to learn before adulthood. Knowledge about landscapes, animals, plants, weather, tools, social relationships, and countless other aspects of life could not be inherited automatically. It had to be taught. Childhood provided the time necessary for that learning to occur, but childhood could only exist if communities invested energy in protection and care. Every adult who contributed to that process was helping preserve the future of the group. Respect may therefore have developed around people who demonstrated reliability in these responsibilities. Others learned that vulnerable individuals were safer in their presence. Parents felt more comfortable relying on them. Children learned to trust them. Such trust was not created through dramatic achievements. It emerged through repeated experiences accumulated across many ordinary days. A child comforted during distress. An injured person assisted during recovery. An elderly member helped during a difficult journey. Each action may have seemed small in isolation. Together, however, they created reputations that became deeply woven into community life. The people associated with care, protection, and responsibility offered something that every group needed but could never take for granted. They helped transform survival from an individual struggle into a collective effort. In doing so, they revealed another path toward respect in prehistoric societies, one built not upon dominance or extraordinary skill, but upon the quiet confidence that others could safely place their trust in them when it mattered most. Trust rarely announces itself. Unlike a successful hunt, it does not arrive in a single dramatic moment that everyone remembers for years afterward. It grows quietly, often through actions so ordinary that they might seem unremarkable when viewed one at a time. A person keeps their word. A person returns when they say they will return. A person notices when someone needs help and offers assistance without being asked. A person remains calm when others become frightened. None of these actions are likely to become stories repeated around a fire for generations, yet together they create something that may be even more valuable than a memorable achievement. They create confidence. In a prehistoric community, confidence in another person could affect countless aspects of daily life. Parents might feel comfortable leaving children nearby while they worked. An injured hunter might trust someone to help carry supplies during a difficult journey. An older member of the group might rely on certain individuals when physical limitations made travel more challenging. Every one of these situations involved vulnerability. Every one required trust. The remarkable thing about trust is that it often becomes visible only when something important is placed in another person's care. The more valuable the responsibility, the more clearly confidence reveals itself. If a community repeatedly entrusted someone with tasks involving the safety and well-being of others, that decision itself may have communicated a great deal about how the group viewed them. Long before formal leadership positions existed, responsibility may have served as one of the clearest signs of respect. People tend to assign important tasks to those they believe will handle them well. This pattern appears throughout human life. Even today, individuals who are considered dependable often find themselves carrying responsibilities that others do not. Something similar may have occurred in prehistoric tribes. Certain individuals developed reputations for reliability, and those reputations encouraged others to place increasing confidence in them. The process likely reinforced itself over time. Responsible behavior generated trust. Trust generated opportunities for responsibility. Successful handling of those responsibilities generated even greater trust. Gradually, a person's standing within the community could grow not because they demanded influence, but because others repeatedly chose to rely upon them. This form of respect differs from admiration for skill in an important way. Skill attracts attention because people notice what someone can do. Trust attracts confidence because people notice who someone is. A skilled hunter may impress others with a successful hunt. A trustworthy individual influences daily life through countless smaller interactions that often receive less attention but occur far more frequently. Communities depend upon these interactions. They create the social fabric that allows cooperation to function. Without trust, every exchange becomes more difficult, every decision becomes more uncertain, every relationship requires additional caution. For groups living close to the edge of survival, such costs could become significant. Trust reduced those costs. It allowed people to cooperate more efficiently, share more willingly, and depend on one another more confidently. This may help explain why reliability often becomes associated with respect across many different societies. Human beings naturally value people who make uncertainty easier to manage. A reliable individual provides a form of stability that benefits everyone around them. Others know what to expect. Promises are more likely to be kept. Responsibilities are more likely to be fulfilled. Vulnerable individuals are more likely to receive protection. These contributions may not always attract immediate recognition, yet their cumulative effect can be enormous. Over years of shared experience, communities learn who consistently strengthens the network of trust that holds everyone together. Those individuals become important not because they stand above others, but because others feel safer when they are present. In a prehistoric tribe, where survival depended heavily upon cooperation and mutual support, that feeling of security may have been one of the strongest foundations upon which lasting respect could be built. As trust accumulated across years of shared experience, it gradually became something larger than confidence in a person's abilities. It became confidence in their presence. People knew what to expect from them. They knew how that individual would likely respond when difficulties emerged, when resources became scarce, when disagreements appeared, or when vulnerable members of the community required support. This predictability carried enormous value because uncertainty was woven into nearly every aspect of prehistoric life. Weather could change unexpectedly, a hunt could fail, an injury could alter daily routines in an instant. Under such conditions, individuals who provided a sense of stability contributed something that could not easily be measured yet was deeply important. Their value was not limited to a particular skill or a particular task. It extended into the emotional and social life of the group itself. A parent sleeping beside the fire at night may have felt more comfortable knowing certain people were nearby. An elder facing physical limitations may have felt reassured by the presence of individuals known for their reliability. A young member of the group, learning how to navigate the complexities of community life, may have looked towards certain adults as examples of how a trustworthy person behaved. None of these forms of influence required authority. They emerged naturally because trust changes the way people perceive one another. When confidence becomes deeply established, others begin turning toward that person almost automatically during uncertain moments. Not because they are required to, but because experience has taught them that doing so is usually worthwhile. This distinction may help explain why some of the most respected individuals in prehistoric communities were not necessarily the most dramatic or visible. Dramatic actions attract attention. Reliability accumulates quietly. A single achievement can be impressive, but a decade of dependable behavior often leaves a deeper mark on collective memory. Communities remember who remained helpful when no reward was expected. They remember who acted fairly when circumstances became difficult. They remember who protected those who could not protect themselves. Over time, these memories become part of a person's reputation, and reputation becomes part of the foundation upon which respect is built. The process is so gradual that people may not even notice it happening. One act of responsibility leads to another. One demonstration of trustworthiness is followed by another. Eventually, a pattern emerges that becomes impossible to ignore. The individual is no longer respected because of a single event. They are respected because years of experience have consistently pointed toward the same conclusion. This person contributes to the well-being of the group. This person can be relied upon. This person helps make life more secure. When viewed from this perspective, respect begins to appear less like a reward and more like a form of recognition. Communities recognize individuals whose behavior repeatedly strengthens the lives of others. They recognize those who reduce risk, encourage cooperation, and help maintain the social bonds that allow people to survive together. In many cases, these contributions may have been more important than displays of strength or personal achievement because they affected the entire network of relationships within the group. A community held together by trust possesses advantages that are difficult to replicate through force alone. People cooperate more willingly, information moves more freely, assistance is offered more readily, children grow up within a more stable environment. The individuals who helped create these conditions were contributing to something larger than themselves. They were helping preserve the cohesion of the community itself. This brings us toward another source of respect that appears again and again throughout human history. Even in groups built upon cooperation, disagreements were inevitable. Resources could become scarce. Personal conflicts could emerge. Different opinions could collide. The communities that endured were not those that avoided conflict entirely, but those that found ways to manage it. In such moments, another type of individual often became invaluable. The person capable of calming tensions, restoring trust, and helping others move forward together after disagreement had threatened to pull them apart. Even in the most cooperative community, disagreement was unavoidable. Human beings have never thought exactly alike, and there is little reason to believe prehistoric people were any different. Individuals varied in personality, experience, priorities, and judgment. One person might believe the group should remain near a familiar hunting ground, while another might argue for moving elsewhere. One family might prefer a particular route during a seasonal journey, while another might favor a different path. Tensions could emerge over resources, responsibilities, relationships, or simple misunderstandings. Life in a small tribe brought people together every day, but constant proximity did not eliminate conflict. In some ways, it may have made conflict more difficult because there was often no easy escape from it. The same people who disagreed in the morning would likely still be sharing food beside the same fire that evening. They would still need to cooperate during hunts, care for children, gather resources, and face the uncertainties of the natural world together. This reality created a challenge that every long-lasting community eventually had to solve. Conflict itself was not necessarily the greatest danger. The greater danger was allowing conflict to grow until it damaged the relationships upon which survival depended. A hunting group divided by resentment might become less effective. Families separated by distrust might become less willing to share resources during difficult times. A community weakened by internal tensions could find itself less prepared to face external challenges. Because of this, individuals who helped prevent disagreements from becoming lasting divisions may have provided an extremely valuable service. Their contribution was often less visible than a successful hunt and less dramatic than an act of physical courage, yet its importance could be felt throughout the entire group. Imagine a disagreement beginning to spread through a camp. Voices become sharper, frustration grows, different people take different sides. In such moments, not everyone responds in the same way. Some individuals may add to the tension, others may withdraw from it completely. Yet there are often people who instinctively move in another direction. They listen carefully, they understand multiple perspectives, they encourage patience, they remind others of shared interests that are larger than the disagreement itself. These behaviors may seem ordinary, but they can have extraordinary effects. A conflict that ends peacefully allows cooperation to continue. A relationship that is repaired remains available when future challenges arise. A group that preserves unity retains one of its greatest strengths. Anthropologists studying small-scale societies have often noted the importance of social mechanisms that reduce tension and maintain cohesion. The exact methods vary across cultures, but the underlying need appears remarkably common. Human communities function more effectively when disagreements can be managed without permanently damaging relationships. This need would have been especially important in prehistoric bands, where people depended heavily upon one another and where alternative social networks were limited. In such settings, the individuals capable of calming tensions may have become deeply respected. They helped preserve something that everyone relied upon, even if few people thought about it directly. They protected cooperation itself. Over time, others may have learned to seek out these individuals during difficult situations. Their opinions carried weight not because they possessed authority in the formal sense, but because they had demonstrated an ability to guide people through uncertainty without creating additional division. Their presence often made resolution more likely. Their judgment helped transform moments of potential fragmentation into opportunities for renewed understanding. This reveals another important layer in the story of respect. Communities did not only value people who could find food, remember knowledge, or care for the vulnerable. They also valued people who could help others continue living and working together despite inevitable disagreements. In a world where survival depended upon cooperation, preserving harmony was not a luxury. It was a practical necessity, and the individuals who helped maintain it may have earned a level of respect that extended far beyond any single achievement. The ability to calm a conflict rarely comes from strength alone. A physically powerful person may be able to silence an argument for a moment, but silence and resolution are not the same thing. A disagreement that is merely suppressed often remains beneath the surface, waiting for another opportunity to emerge. The people who helped communities remain stable were often doing something different. They were helping others continue trusting one another after frustration, disappointment, or anger had appeared. In a small prehistoric tribe, this ability may have been extraordinarily valuable because relationships could not easily be discarded and replaced. Every person represented years of shared experience. Every adult contributed labor, knowledge, protection, or care. Every damaged relationship carried costs that extended beyond the individuals directly involved. When cooperation weakened between two members of the group, the effects could spread outward through families, friendships, and daily activities. Because of this, people who understood how to reduce tension were often protecting far more than a single conversation. They were protecting the social fabric that held the community together. Imagine an evening after a difficult day. A hunt has gone poorly, energy is low, and patience has become thin. Small frustrations that might normally be ignored begin attracting attention. A careless remark creates offense. A disagreement over resources becomes more emotional than expected. Under such conditions, the people who contribute most to the group are not always the loudest voices. Sometimes they are the individuals who know how to slow a situation down before it grows larger. They ask questions instead of making accusations. They encourage understanding instead of retaliation. They help people remember that they will still need one another tomorrow. These actions may appear simple, yet they require qualities that communities often value deeply. Patience, self-control, empathy, and good judgment are rarely dramatic traits, but they become highly visible when emotions begin to rise. Human beings naturally notice who makes difficult situations worse and who makes them better. Over time, these observations influence reputation. A person who repeatedly helps restore cooperation becomes associated with stability. Others begin viewing them as someone worth listening to when tensions appear. Their influence grows not because they demand it, but because experience repeatedly demonstrates its usefulness. Anthropologists have long observed that social harmony in small communities often depends upon informal forms of leadership rather than formal authority. Individuals gain influence because of how they behave, not because of an official position. This may have been especially true in prehistoric societies where survival depended heavily upon voluntary cooperation. A person who could encourage reconciliation provided a practical benefit to everyone around them. They helped ensure that disagreements remained temporary rather than permanent. They reduced the likelihood that personal conflicts would interfere with hunting, gathering, childcare, teaching, or other activities essential to group survival. Over many years, these contributions could become part of collective memory. People remembered who remained calm when others became angry. They remembered who treated different sides fairly. They remembered who seemed more interested in solutions than in victory. Such memories mattered because they created confidence. When future disagreements emerged, community members already knew whom they trusted to help navigate them. This trust often became a source of respect in its own right. The respected individual was not necessarily the person who won every argument. In many cases, they may have been the person who cared least about winning and most about preserving the relationships that allowed the group to continue functioning as a community. This distinction is important because it reveals another recurring pattern in the story of respect. Again and again, the qualities that earned lasting admiration were often the qualities that strengthened cooperation. Whether through sharing resources, preserving knowledge, caring for vulnerable individuals, or reducing conflict, respected people repeatedly made life together more manageable. Their value extended beyond personal achievement because they improved the ability of others to live and work alongside one another. In a prehistoric tribe, where survival depended upon exactly that kind of cooperation, such contributions could become impossible to overlook. As years passed within a small prehistoric community, people were constantly gathering information about one another, not through formal evaluation or deliberate judgment, but simply by living side by side. They watched who remained dependable when circumstances became difficult. They watched who shared resources during times of uncertainty. They watched who protected children, cared for the injured, remembered important knowledge, and contributed to the daily work required for survival. They also watched what happened when disagreements emerged. Every conflict revealed something about the people involved. Some individuals seemed to leave tension behind wherever they went, turning small frustrations into larger problems and allowing personal grievances to spread through the group. Others seemed to have the opposite effect. Their presence lowered the temperature of difficult situations. They listened before speaking. They understood that maintaining relationships often mattered more than proving a point. They helped people move beyond immediate emotions and return their attention to the larger reality that connected everyone together. In a prehistoric tribe, that larger reality was impossible to ignore for long. The same individuals who argued one day would still need each other during a hunt, during a journey, during a harsh season, or during a moment of danger. A community could not afford endless divisions. Cooperation was not an idealistic goal. It was a practical requirement of survival. Because of this, the people who preserved cooperation may have provided one of the most valuable services imaginable. Their contribution did not always leave physical evidence behind. Archaeologists can uncover tools, hearths, animal bones, and traces of ancient shelters, but they cannot excavate a repaired friendship or uncover the remains of a conflict that never escalated because someone intervened wisely. Yet the absence of physical evidence does not mean such contributions were unimportant. In fact, they may have been among the most important contributions of all. Every disagreement that ended peacefully preserved relationships that could continue benefiting the group. Every conflict resolved without lasting resentment helped maintain trust. Every successful act of reconciliation protected the network of cooperation upon which survival depended. Over many years, these effects accumulated. People remembered who could be relied upon when emotions ran high. They remembered who treated others fairly, even when personal interests were involved. They remembered who seemed more interested in strengthening the community than in increasing their own status. These memories shaped reputation, and reputation shaped influence. When future disagreements appeared, others naturally turned toward individuals whose judgment had proven valuable in the past. Their opinions carried weight because experience had repeatedly demonstrated their usefulness. This is one of the recurring patterns we have encountered throughout this journey. Respect often flowed toward people whose actions benefited more than themselves. The hunter who shared food, the elder who preserved knowledge, the caregiver who protected the vulnerable, and the mediator who restored harmony all contributed to something larger than personal success. They strengthened the community. The forms of contribution differed, yet the underlying principle remained remarkably similar. Human groups tended to value people who made collective life more stable, more cooperative, and more secure. Seen from this perspective, influence in a prehistoric tribe may have looked very different from the forms of power that became common later in human history. It was often rooted in trust rather than authority, in reputation rather than rank, and in service rather than command. The most respected individuals were not necessarily those who stood above everyone else. They were often the people who helped hold everyone together. As this picture becomes clearer, another question naturally emerges. Many of the qualities we have explored, good judgment, generosity, knowledge, trustworthiness, and the ability to manage conflict, require time to develop. They are rarely acquired quickly. This brings us toward another source of respect that appears repeatedly in traditional societies around the world. What happened when a person had survived not just one difficult season, but many? What value did communities place upon those who had spent decades gathering experience that younger generations had not yet had the opportunity to acquire? By the time a person had lived through many decades in a prehistoric world, they carried something that could not be gathered, hunted, traded, or inherited. they carried experience. Every season they survived added another layer to their understanding of the world around them. They had seen years when food was plentiful and years when it was scarce. They had witnessed unusual weather, difficult migrations, successful decisions, and costly mistakes. They had watched children become adults and adults become elders. They had observed patterns that younger members of the community had not yet lived long enough to recognize. In a world without written records, these experiences existed almost entirely within human memory, making those who possessed them an important source of knowledge for everyone else. Yet it would be a mistake to assume that age automatically produced respect. Human beings have probably never worked that way. Simply growing older does not guarantee wisdom, and prehistoric people were likely just as capable of recognizing that fact as we are today. What age provided was opportunity. It provided opportunities to observe, to learn, to remember, and to compare one event with another across long stretches of time. Whether those opportunities turned into useful judgment depended upon the individual. Some people accumulated years. Others accumulated understanding. The individuals who earned deep respect were often those whose experiences continued helping the group long after their physical abilities had begun to change. Imagine a younger hunter preparing for a journey into unfamiliar territory. Physical strength may help him travel farther, but strength alone cannot reveal what happened in that territory 20 years earlier. An older member of the community may remember details that no one else possesses. They may recall where water remained available during a drought, where dangerous encounters once occurred, or how previous generations responded when faced with similar circumstances. Their value lies not in what they can physically accomplish at that moment, but in the perspective they bring to decisions affecting everyone else. This perspective becomes increasingly important because human beings often learn through patterns. A single event can be confusing. Multiple events observed across decades begin to reveal connections. An elder who has witnessed the same seasonal cycle many times may notice changes that younger people overlook. Someone who has survived several periods of hardship may recognize warning signs long before others become concerned. These abilities emerge not from extraordinary talent, but from accumulated experience. Over time, communities may come to recognize the practical value of such experience. Anthropologists studying traditional societies have frequently noted that older individuals often contribute through advice, teaching, memory, and judgment, even when they are no longer performing the most physically demanding tasks. Their role shifts rather than disappears. Knowledge gathered across many years remains useful because the challenges faced by the community rarely remain completely new. Human groups repeatedly encounter uncertainty, risk, and difficult decisions. Experience helps place those challenges within a broader context. It reminds people that today's problem may resemble something encountered before. It offers examples of what worked and what failed. It helps transform memory into guidance. This may be one reason why age and respect are so often associated in human societies, though not always in the way people imagine. Respect was not necessarily directed toward age itself. It was directed toward the value that experience could provide when combined with wisdom, reliability, and concern for the community. The older individual who shared knowledge, taught patiently, and helped others avoid mistakes was contributing something that younger members could not easily replace. Their experiences represented a resource accumulated over a lifetime. Every lesson learned through hardship, every observation preserved in memory, and every insight gained through years of participation in community life became part of that resource. In a prehistoric tribe, where survival often depended upon making good decisions under uncertain conditions, such a resource could become extraordinarily valuable, and the people who carried it often found themselves occupying a special place within the respect and attention of those around them. The value of experience often becomes most visible when a community encounters uncertainty. During ordinary times, younger and older members may appear to contribute in very different ways. Younger adults may travel farther, move faster, carry heavier loads, and perform many of the physically demanding tasks that daily life requires. Their energy helps sustain the immediate needs of the group. Yet when circumstances become unfamiliar, when expected patterns begin to change, or when difficult decisions must be made with limited information, another kind of contribution can become just as important. Experience allows people to compare the present with the past. It allows them to recognize similarities hidden beneath surface differences. It allows them to remember consequences that others have never witnessed. In a prehistoric world, where uncertainty was a constant companion, this ability could prove remarkably valuable. Imagine a season that begins to feel different from previous years. Rain arrives later than expected. Animal movements become less predictable. Familiar sources of food produce less than they once did. Younger members of the community may recognize that something is changing, but they have never encountered exactly this situation before. An older individual who has lived through several decades possesses a wider frame of reference. They may remember another unusual season many years earlier. They may recall which responses proved useful and which created additional problems. Their memory does not guarantee a perfect solution, but it provides something that the community would otherwise lack. It provides perspective. Perspective is difficult to measure, yet it influences decisions in powerful ways. A person who has seen similar challenges before often reacts differently from someone encountering them for the first time. Fear may be tempered by memory. Impatience may be moderated by experience. Confidence may become more realistic because past successes and failures have both been observed. Over many years, these accumulated lessons can shape judgment in ways that benefit everyone around them. This is one reason why communities often pay attention to individuals who have repeatedly demonstrated sound judgment across long periods of time. Their value extends beyond any single piece of knowledge. They help others interpret events rather than merely observe them. Human beings learn not only from direct experience, but also from the experiences of others. A lesson personally learned through hardship can be valuable. A lesson received from someone who has already endured that hardship can be equally valuable and sometimes far less costly. In prehistoric societies, where mistakes could carry serious consequences, the ability to learn indirectly through elders and experienced community members may have provided significant advantages. Knowledge gathered over decades could help younger generations avoid repeating the same errors. It could help them recognize opportunities they might otherwise miss. It could shorten the distance between inexperience and competence. Anthropologists have suggested that one reason human beings maintain long lifespans beyond their reproductive years may be connected to the value older individuals provide through knowledge and support. While the details remain subjects of ongoing research, the broader observation remains compelling. Human communities often benefit from the continued presence of individuals who possess extensive experience. Their contributions do not disappear when physical abilities begin to change. Instead, those contributions often shift toward teaching, advising, remembering, and helping others make sense of a complex world. This may explain why respect frequently accumulates around certain older individuals. It is not simply because they have lived longer, it is because their years have been transformed into something useful for others. Communities tend to admire people who reduce uncertainty, and experience is one of the most effective tools for doing exactly that. Every season survived, every challenge remembered, and every lesson preserved adds another layer to a person's ability to guide others through unfamiliar situations. In a prehistoric tribe, where survival depended upon navigating uncertainty again and again, such guidance could become one of the most valuable gifts a person had to offer. As the years accumulated and one generation gradually gave way to the next, communities were constantly deciding which experiences deserved to be remembered and which lessons were important enough to carry forward. Not every memory held the same value. Not every older individual became a source of guidance. The passage of time alone was never the whole story. What mattered was what a person did with the time they had been given. Some people simply grew older. Others transformed decades of observation into knowledge that benefited everyone around them. These were often the individuals whose influence continued long after their physical strength had begun to fade. A younger hunter might move more quickly across the landscape, yet an older person might notice a detail that completely changed the group's understanding of a situation. A younger adult might possess greater endurance during a journey, yet an older member might remember why a particular route had once been avoided. In this way, experience and physical ability often complemented one another rather than competing. Communities needed both. They needed the energy of youth and the perspective of age. They needed people capable of acting and people capable of helping others decide when and how to act. This balance may have been one of the reasons older individuals often remained important, even when they were no longer contributing in the same ways they had earlier in life. Their value had shifted rather than disappeared. Every year had added another layer to their understanding of the world, and that understanding could continue helping the community long after the events themselves had passed. Imagine a fire burning late into the evening, while younger members of the group listen to stories they have heard before. At first, those stories may seem familiar, even repetitive. Yet hidden within them are memories of real events, difficult decisions, successful strategies, and costly mistakes. The stories survive because the lessons survive. Every retelling preserves information that may someday become useful again. A child listening beside the fire may not yet understand the significance of what they are hearing, but years later, when faced with a similar challenge, the memory may return. In this way, experience travels across generations. The person telling the story becomes more than an individual. They become a bridge, connecting the past to the future. This role may have earned a particularly deep form of respect, because it benefited people who had not even been born when the original events occurred. The contribution extended beyond immediate needs. It helped preserve continuity itself. Human communities depend upon continuity. Knowledge must survive. Relationships must survive. Lessons must survive. Without mechanisms for carrying experience forward, every generation would be forced to begin again from the beginning. The individuals who helped prevent that loss were protecting something immensely valuable. They were protecting accumulated understanding. This may explain why respect often followed those who combined experience with generosity. Knowledge kept only for oneself has limited impact. Knowledge shared widely can shape the behavior of an entire community. The most respected elders were likely not those who simply possessed information, but those who used that information to help others grow, learn, and avoid unnecessary hardship. Again and again, the same pattern appears. Whether discussing hunters, caregivers, teachers, or mediators, respect tended to grow around people whose abilities benefited more than themselves. Experience followed the same rule. A lifetime of knowledge became most valuable when it strengthened the lives of others. Seen from this perspective, age was not respected because it represented survival alone. It was respected because survival had produced wisdom, and wisdom had been transformed into something useful for the community. As we step back and look at the many paths that could lead toward respect in a prehistoric tribe, another question begins to emerge. If knowledge, generosity, trustworthiness, and experience all created influence, what happened when such influence began affecting the decisions of the group itself? At what point did respect become a force capable of shaping the direction of an entire community? By this point in our journey, a pattern has begun to emerge from many different directions. The respected hunter was not necessarily respected only because of hunting. The respected elder was not necessarily respected only because of age. The respected caregiver, teacher, or mediator was valued for something larger than the specific task they performed. In each case, respect grew because other people repeatedly experienced benefits from that person's presence. Their actions reduced uncertainty. Their decisions improved cooperation. Their knowledge helped others avoid mistakes. Their generosity strengthened relationships. Over time, these contributions accumulated into something that extended beyond reputation alone. They began to influence how communities made decisions. This influence is important because it reveals a difference between authority and respect. Authority can exist even when trust is weak. A person may possess the power to give orders because of a formal position, a law, or the threat of punishment. Respect operates differently. Respect depends upon voluntary attention. People choose to listen. They choose to consider advice. They choose to follow suggestions because experience has convinced them that doing so is worthwhile. For most of prehistoric human history, communities lived without the large institutions that later societies would create. There were no governments in the modern sense, no bureaucracies, and no permanent systems capable of enforcing decisions across thousands or millions of people. Human groups were small, relationships were personal. Under such conditions, influence often depended heavily upon persuasion, trust, and reputation. Imagine a group discussing whether to remain in a familiar location or move elsewhere. No single person may possess the unquestioned ability to decide for everyone. Different opinions are expressed. Different concerns are raised. Some individuals speak from recent experience. Others draw upon older memories. Some emphasize immediate opportunities, while others focus on long-term risks. As the conversation unfolds, certain voices begin carrying greater weight, not necessarily because they speak more loudly, but because the people listening have learned something over many years. They have learned whose judgment tends to be reliable. They have learned who remains calm when uncertainty appears. They have learned who usually considers the interests of the group rather than only personal advantage. Gradually, attention begins flowing toward those individuals. Their influence emerges from accumulated trust rather than formal power. Anthropologists often use the word prestige to describe a form of influence that operates in this way. Prestige is not identical to domination. A respected individual cannot simply force others to agree. Their influence exists because people willingly grant it. Others listen because they expect useful information, sound judgment, or valuable guidance. In many ways, prestige represents one of the most cooperative forms of influence found in human societies. It depends upon a continuing relationship between the respected individual and the community around them. If trust disappears, influence weakens. If good judgment repeatedly fails, attention shifts elsewhere. Respect must be maintained because it remains dependent upon the confidence of others. This may be one of the reasons respected individuals often continued behaving in ways that benefited the group. Their influence rested upon reputation, and reputation rested upon actions. Every decision contributed to a larger record that people were constantly observing. Every act of generosity, fairness, wisdom, or responsibility reinforced the trust that had already been earned. Over many years, certain individuals became people whose opinions naturally shaped the direction of the community, yet their influence remained fundamentally different from command. The group listened because it wanted to listen. The group followed because experience suggested that following was often beneficial. This distinction matters because it brings us closer to understanding the true nature of respect in a prehistoric tribe. Respect was not simply admiration. It was not merely appreciation. It was a form of social trust so strong that it influenced collective decisions. Long before crowns, official titles, or organized governments existed, human beings were already granting influence to people they believed improved the chances of survival, cooperation, and success. In that sense, respect was more than a feeling. It was a force that quietly helped shape the path a community chose to follow. The difference between being listened to and being obeyed may seem small at first, yet it reveals one of the most important distinctions in the entire story of respect. A person can be obeyed because others fear the consequences of refusal. A person can be obeyed because circumstances leave no immediate alternative. A person can even be obeyed for a short time through intimidation, pressure, or displays of strength. None of these things automatically create respect. Respect emerges under different conditions. Respect exists when people retain the freedom to ignore someone's advice, yet choose to listen anyway. It exists when influence survives even in the absence of force. It exists when confidence has become strong enough that others willingly give weight to a person's words before the outcome is known. In the small communities that characterized much of prehistoric human life, this distinction may have carried enormous importance. Every individual depended upon relationships that extended across years or even decades. People remembered past behavior. They remembered promises kept and promises broken. They remembered moments of generosity and moments of selfishness. Because these memories remained active within the social life of the group, influence could not easily be separated from reputation. A person who relied primarily on intimidation might occasionally achieve immediate goals, but intimidation carries costs. People become cautious, trust weakens, cooperation becomes less enthusiastic, valuable information may stop flowing freely, relationships become more fragile. The individual may still possess influence, but it becomes increasingly dependent upon maintaining pressure. Respect functions differently. When influence grows from trust, people cooperate because they believe cooperation is beneficial. They share information more openly. They seek guidance voluntarily. They remain willing to work together even when circumstances become difficult. This creates a form of influence that is often more stable because it depends upon confidence rather than fear. Imagine two individuals within the same prehistoric community. Both are capable, experienced, and intelligent. One tends to dominate conversations, dismiss opposing views, and insist upon being correct. The other listens carefully, considers different perspectives, and explains opinions in ways that others find useful. Both may affect group decisions, yet the nature of their influence differs. The first individual may win arguments. The second may win trust. Over long periods of time, trust often proves more durable because it encourages people to remain engaged rather than withdrawing. Human beings generally respond more positively to guidance that feels earned than to control that feels imposed. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout human societies and may have deep evolutionary roots. Communities benefit when useful knowledge spreads efficiently. They benefit when experienced individuals can influence decisions without constant conflict. They benefit when cooperation remains voluntary rather than requiring continual enforcement. Prestige and respect help create these conditions because they encourage people to pay attention to individuals whose past actions have demonstrated value. Anthropologists studying prestige-based influence often note that respected individuals frequently gain followers not because they demand them, but because others actively seek opportunities to learn from them. Knowledge, judgment, and experience become resources that people voluntarily approach. In such situations, influence flows toward those who provide value rather than merely exercising control. This may have been especially important in prehistoric tribes where formal mechanisms of authority were limited or absent. A person's ability to influence others depended heavily upon whether others believed that influence deserved to exist. Seen from this perspective, respect begins to appear as a remarkable social achievement. It is not something a person can simply claim. It must be granted by others. It emerges from countless observations made across years of shared experience. People decide, often without consciously realizing it, that a particular individual is worth listening to. They decide that the guidance offered by that person deserves consideration. They decide that following their advice often leads to better outcomes. When enough of those decisions accumulate, influence begins to emerge naturally. The respected individual does not stand above the community. Instead, they become woven into its decision-making process, helping shape the direction of the group through confidence that has been earned rather than authority that has been imposed. As influence grows from trust, reputation, experience, and contribution, it begins to affect more than individual relationships. It begins to shape the choices made by the community itself. This does not necessarily happen through formal leadership or explicit authority. In many prehistoric societies, influence may have operated through something much quieter. People simply paid attention to certain individuals more than others. When uncertainty appeared, they listened carefully. When important decisions approached, they considered those opinions seriously. When different possibilities competed for attention, the judgment of respected individuals often carried additional weight because experience had repeatedly demonstrated its value. Over many years, this process could guide the direction of an entire group without requiring anyone to stand above the group. A community deciding where to travel, when to move camp, how to respond to environmental changes, or how to manage internal tensions would naturally draw upon the knowledge and judgment of those who had earned confidence through their actions. The respected hunter might contribute insight based upon experience with animal behavior. The respected elder might provide perspective drawn from decades of observation. The respected caregiver might understand how a decision could affect families and children. The respected mediator might recognize potential sources of conflict before they became serious problems. Influence flowed from many directions because respect itself could emerge from many different forms of contribution. This is one of the most revealing aspects of prehistoric social life. There was rarely a single path toward becoming valuable. Communities needed different abilities from different people. They needed knowledge, cooperation, memory, generosity, trustworthiness, and good judgment. The individuals who embodied these qualities often found themselves helping shape collective decisions, not because they possessed formal power, but because others believed their contributions improved the chances of success. This type of influence may have been particularly effective because it remained connected to accountability. A respected individual could not rely indefinitely upon past achievements. Their influence depended upon maintaining the confidence of others. If their advice repeatedly failed, if they became selfish, or if they stopped acting in ways that benefited the group, trust could weaken. Unlike authority enforced through institutions, prestige had to be continually renewed through behavior. Communities were constantly observing. They remembered. They compared words with actions. They noticed whether a person's reputation remained deserved. This made respect both powerful and fragile at the same time. Powerful because it could shape decisions affecting many people. Fragile because it depended entirely upon the willingness of others to continue granting it. Seen through this lens, respect appears less like a possession and more like an ongoing relationship between an individual and the community around them. It existed only as long as that relationship remained healthy. Every act of generosity strengthened it. Every display of good judgment reinforced it. Every effort to help others preserved it. Over many years, some individuals became deeply influential, not because they commanded obedience, but because they repeatedly demonstrated value. Their presence helped communities navigate uncertainty. Their advice reduced mistakes. Their behavior encouraged cooperation. They became people whose voices carried weight because their lives had provided evidence that listening was worthwhile. This realization brings us very close to the heart of our original question. Throughout this journey, we have encountered many different paths toward respect. We have seen that strength alone was not enough. Skill alone was not enough. Age alone was not enough. Influence itself was not enough. Again and again, the same pattern has appeared beneath different forms. Respect tended to grow around individuals whose actions improved the lives of others and strengthened the community as a whole. As we enter the final stage of this exploration, all of these threads begin to come together. The hunter, the teacher, the caregiver, the mediator, the elder, and the trusted advisor may appear very different on the surface, yet they share something important in common. Understanding that common element may bring us closer than ever to answering what truly made someone respected in a prehistoric tribe. If we return to the question that has quietly accompanied us since the beginning of this journey, the answer now begins to emerge from many different directions at once. What made someone respected in a prehistoric tribe? At first, the answer may have seemed obvious. Strength appears important. Skill appears important. Experience appears important. Yet as we have moved through the lives of these ancient communities, a more complicated picture has gradually taken shape. Again and again, we encountered individuals who earned admiration not because of a single quality, but because of the effect they had on the people around them. The hunter who provided food gained attention, yet deeper respect often depended on what happened after the hunt was over. The elder who remembered the past gained influence, yet that influence grew stronger when knowledge was shared rather than guarded. The caregiver who protected children, the mediator who reduced conflict, and the trusted companion who remained dependable during difficult times all contributed something that extended beyond personal achievement. They made life within the community more secure, more cooperative, and more predictable. Viewed separately, these contributions may seem different. Viewed together, they begin to reveal a common pattern. Human beings have always depended upon one another, far more than we sometimes imagine. The image of the solitary survivor overcoming every challenge alone has enormous appeal in stories, but it rarely reflects how people actually lived for most of human history. Prehistoric life was deeply social. Individuals survived because groups survived. Groups survived because cooperation remained strong enough to withstand uncertainty. Every successful hunt, every shared meal, every remembered lesson, every repaired relationship, and every act of care became part of a larger system that allowed communities to continue from one generation to the next. Respect appears to have grown around the people who strengthened that system. This perspective changes how we think about status itself. In many modern settings, status is often associated with possessions, visibility, or formal authority. Prehistoric communities may have evaluated values somewhat differently. A person's importance was frequently measured through their contribution to collective survival. Could others rely upon them? Did their actions make cooperation easier or more difficult? Did they create trust or weaken it? Did they help the group navigate uncertainty more successfully? These questions may have mattered far more than simple displays of power. This does not mean prehistoric people were free from competition, ambition, or disagreement. They were human beings, and human beings have always possessed complex motivations. Yet even within that complexity, certain patterns repeatedly rewarded behaviors that benefited the group. Generosity created stronger social bonds, knowledge reduced costly mistakes, reliability increased confidence, good judgment improved decisions. The ability to maintain harmony preserved cooperation. Over time, these qualities often became associated with respect because communities experienced their value directly. People remembered who helped during difficult periods. They remembered who shared when resources were scarce. They remembered who offered guidance when uncertainty appeared. Memory transformed individual actions into reputation, and reputation transformed repeated contributions into influence. This may be one of the most remarkable aspects of the story. Respect was rarely created by a single moment. It emerged through accumulation. Hundreds of ordinary decisions mattered more than one extraordinary achievement. Small acts repeated consistently over many years could shape a person's standing within the community more profoundly than any isolated display of talent. A respected individual was often someone whose value became visible not in a single dramatic event, but across an entire lifetime of interactions. As all these pieces begin fitting together, the answer to our question starts becoming clearer. The most respected person in a prehistoric tribe may not have been the strongest hunter, the loudest voice, or the individual who could frighten others into obedience. More often, respect appears to have gathered around those whose presence made the community function better. They helped people survive, they helped people cooperate, they helped people trust one another. In doing so, they became something every human group has always needed, a source of stability in an uncertain world. The deeper we look into the lives of prehistoric people, the more the answer seems to move away from power and toward usefulness. Not usefulness in the narrow sense of completing a task, but usefulness in the broader sense of helping a community continue to exist through time. The hunter who shared food, the elder who preserved memory, the caregiver who protected the vulnerable, the mediator who restored trust, and the experienced advisor whose judgment guided difficult decisions all appeared different at first glance. Their daily activities were different, their abilities were different, their ages were often different. Yet beneath those differences lies a remarkably consistent pattern. Each of them reduced a problem that threatened the survival of the group. Hunger, uncertainty, ignorance, conflict, vulnerability, and poor decision-making all carried risks. The individuals who helped manage those risks provided value that extended beyond themselves. This may be why their influence endured. Human communities tend to remember people who make life better for others. They remember those who solve problems that affect everyone rather than only themselves. In a prehistoric tribe, where the boundary between individual well-being and group well-being was often very thin, such contributions could become extraordinarily important. A person's reputation was built from thousands of observations gathered across years of shared experience. People saw who remained dependable when circumstances became difficult. They saw who continued contributing when recognition was unlikely. They saw who acted responsibly even when no one could force them to do so. Over time, these observations accumulated into a kind of social memory that quietly shaped how individuals were viewed. Respect was one of the outcomes of that process. It was not merely admiration for success, it was recognition of value demonstrated repeatedly over time. This helps explain why many of the qualities associated with respect appear surprisingly familiar even today. Trustworthiness, generosity, wisdom, patience, reliability, fairness, and concern for others remain qualities that many human beings continue to admire. Cultures differ enormously, and every society develops its own expectations and traditions, yet certain patterns appear again and again because they address fundamental challenges of living together. Human beings are social creatures. We depend upon cooperation. We depend upon information shared by others. We depend upon networks of support that extend beyond ourselves. The individuals who strengthen those networks often become important regardless of the historical period in which they live. In this sense, the story of respect in a prehistoric tribe is also a story about human nature. It reminds us that many of the qualities people value most deeply are not necessarily the qualities that attract the most immediate attention. Physical strength is visible. Wealth is visible. Status is visible. The qualities that create lasting trust are often quieter. They reveal themselves gradually through behavior repeated across months, years, and sometimes entire lifetimes. A person earns confidence one interaction at a time. They earn a reputation one decision at a time. They earn respect through countless moments that may appear insignificant when viewed individually, but become powerful when viewed together. This perspective may also explain why respect often feels different from popularity. Popularity can rise and fall quickly. Respect tends to move more slowly because it depends upon evidence gathered over long periods of time. Communities learn who consistently contributes to collective well-being and who does not. They learn who can be relied upon during uncertainty and who cannot. The judgments formed through these experiences become part of the social fabric that guides future relationships and decisions. Long before written laws attempted to define good behavior, communities were already making these judgments through everyday life. The people who repeatedly strengthened cooperation, protected relationships, preserved knowledge, and helped others navigate uncertainty became examples of what the group considered valuable. Their influence extended beyond individual achievements because it reflected a deeper truth about survival itself. Human beings have always accomplished more together than they could alone, and the individuals who best supported that reality often became the people others respected most. As the fire burns lower and the long journey through prehistoric life begins to draw toward its end, it becomes possible to look back across everything we have explored and see a picture that is both ancient and surprisingly familiar. We began with a question about respect. We imagined a world without crowns, without written laws, without official titles, and without institutions capable of granting permanent authority. At first, such a world can seem distant from our own, yet the closer we looked, the more recognizable it became. People still depended on one another, they still faced uncertainty, they still needed trust, cooperation, knowledge, and care. The details of daily life were different, but many of the social challenges were remarkably similar. Every community had to decide whom to listen to, whom to trust, and whom to value. Those decisions shaped the lives of everyone around them. As we followed the traces left behind by hunters, elders, caregivers, teachers, mediators, and trusted companions, a common theme appeared again and again. The individuals who earned lasting respect were often the people whose actions improved life for others. They reduced risk, they preserved knowledge, they shared resources, they protected relationships, they helped communities navigate uncertainty, they made cooperation easier and survival more likely. Their influence did not depend entirely on strength, wealth, or authority. Instead, it grew from repeated demonstrations of value that others could see and remember. This does not mean every prehistoric community was identical, nor does it mean every respected person possessed the same qualities. Human societies have always been diverse. Different environments create different challenges, and different challenges reward different forms of contribution. Yet across that diversity, a pattern remains visible. Respect often flowed toward people who strengthened the community rather than weakening it. The path could take many forms, but the destination was remarkably similar. A respected person became someone whose presence made life better for those around them. There is a quiet lesson hidden within this observation. Much of what archaeology can uncover comes from stone, bone, tools, shelters, and other physical remains. These discoveries tell us a great deal about how prehistoric people lived, yet some of the most important parts of human life leave almost no direct trace behind. Trust leaves no fossil. Generosity leaves no footprint preserved for thousands of years. Wisdom cannot be excavated from the ground. Cooperation rarely survives as an artifact. And yet these invisible things may have played an enormous role in determining which individuals were valued most highly within their communities. In many ways, the story of respect is therefore a reminder that not everything important can be measured easily. Some of the qualities that help human beings thrive together are quiet qualities. They accumulate slowly. They reveal themselves through patterns rather than dramatic moments. They often become visible only when viewed across long stretches of time. Perhaps that is why respect has remained such a powerful idea throughout human history. It reflects something deeper than admiration. It reflects recognition of value that has been tested through experience. As our fire finally fades into the darkness and the voices of this prehistoric camp grow distant, we are left with a picture that feels less like a conclusion and more like an invitation to reflect. For most of human history, the people who earned the deepest respect were often those who helped others survive, learn, cooperate, and endure. Their names have almost entirely disappeared. Their stories were rarely written down. Their faces are lost to time. Yet the qualities that made them valuable may still be recognizable today. And perhaps the most interesting question is not whether we can know exactly who those people were. Perhaps the more interesting question is this: if you had sat beside one of those ancient fires and quietly watched a community decide whom they trusted most, would the answer have been as different from our own world as we often imagine?